5 years ago, the Norwegians left our union and things have gone downhill since then. A year ago, a general strike devastated our economy and as a result, emigration is massive. The general strike was also a total disaster for the trade union, and most members are now instead joining the more radical anarcho-syndicalist SAC. Therefore, the class conflict has grown and destabilized our country. Luckily, the social conservative government has already started to work on our recovery from the strikes. They have started supporting the more mainstream trade unions to try and stop the flood towards the SAC. Soon a conference was held in Saltsjöbaden to settle the differences between the biggest trade union and the biggest employers' organization. After more than 2 months of agreements and disagreements, the conference was successful at dampening the current class conflict. Due to the strikes, around 20,000 workers lost their jobs. It is our responsibility to find them new factories to work in. So we set to work on constructing a new factory for them, but it will take a long time. And with less than a year to the next election, the social conservatives will have to succeed if they want to stay in power. So they began encouraging industrialization to move us away from an agricultural economy. But it was too late. The election arrived and Karl Staff, a liberal hated by the right, won the election, promising to fix the economy. The first month in office, he raised taxes and endorsed the feminist movement in the goal of pushing universal suffrage through. To gain enough power in the parliament, the liberals chose to ally the socialists, despite them gaining political ground due to this. In the horror of the conservatives, they began slashing military spending to help the economy. This, together with universal suffrage finally becoming a thing and denunciation of militarism, drove the conservatives closer and closer to a revolt. The liberal government, not seeing the threat, continued with the reforms. March the 7th, 1912, the conservatives rallied 30,000 farmers and marched into Stockholm. With the king on their side, Karl Staff was forced to resign, and with no clear successor, we find ourselves in a cabinet crisis. These radical times call for radical measures, and the ultra-conservative Ernst Trygger was appointed prime minister by the king. But he didn't stay in office for long. The SAC, having grown substantially after universal suffrage and socialist policies driven through by the liberals, used their influence to launch a bloodless coup and seize the machines of power. With the SAC now in power, we will begin to destroy the capitalist economy and replace it with our socialist one. All peasants of Sweden and all workers of Sweden will be mobilized to fix the Swedish economy and together raise our living standards. But to construct new factories and improve our farming capabilities will cost a lot of money which we don't have. So to kill 2 birds in 1 stone, we will exile the proto-fascist monarchy and seize the royal estates. This and our rapid mobilization of our working force has allowed our economy to finally recover completely from the mismanagement by the capitalists. Our economy is now one of the fastest growing in the world. This will hopefully enlighten some other nations to join our ideology, since we are the only socialists in the world. This means we have met a lot of backlash from both the monarchies and the capitalist nations around the world. But the steady stream of socialists, communists and anarchists from those nations is helping our ideology grow throughout our country, and their expertise is valuable for our economy. Furthermore, our population is beginning to grow now that they are replacing those leaving for America. So our goal is to be the forefront of the worldwide revolution, but surrounded by enemies, our army has to be way stronger than what it is now for us to survive. While we do have a big military industry after all our socialist restructuring, we lack the manpower to host a big army. The easy solution is to enable women to serve in the army too. We will be the first nation to achieve true sexual equality. With all this new manpower, or should I say woman power, we can massively enlarge our current divisions. From 12 with no support companies to 18 with both engineer companies and support artillery. With them our anarchist dream will be established, and this dream is not an anarchist Sweden, but an anarchist Scandinavia. We will unify the Scandinavian people to bring our utopian future to the whole region. Our people will rally around the red flag and keep it flying here. We will now double our military by training 10 more divisions. Our army will be boosted and we will try our best to progress our doctrines. Then it happened. After an Austrian ultimatum to Serbia which they refused, war started between the Central Powers and the Entente. And with the British sending their army to France, we can begin to expand without their intervention. We will prepare a great union with Norway under the threat of military intervention. Our whole army was moved to the long border with them, and despite a terrible supply, we outnumbered them massively. And under the massive pressure, their government surrendered and their army and navy joined our side. We will immediately start to integrate their economy with ours and turn it more towards war. With the massive influx of socialist intellectuals, our research has taken a massive boost. We are one of the first nations to develop fighters and naval bombers to help us secure the Baltic Sea. We have also started taking a look into armored production, but it will take a long time before that becomes a reality. With the Norwegian Navy joining our side, we now have more than 100 ships. But this won't be enough to gain complete superiority over the Baltic Sea, so we will begin to develop new ships and construct new dockyards. Now we should be ready to deal with the Danish and unite Scandinavia. Trying to cross straight to Köpenhamn seems almost impossible. Instead, we will try to naval invade Aarhus, secure all of Jutland, and then enter the capital from two sides. We declared war and managed to secure naval supremacy immediately. Our two divisions left the port of Göteborg and sailed over to the Danish mainland. With no resistance, we secured the port of Aarhus and could take over the rest of Jutland. The Danish had prepared the defense of Odense to stop us from crossing over to their islands. But with the help of our navy, we could slowly but surely advance over to the island, and after that we continued to the island of Köpenhamn. We began to attack from both sides, but as expected, we only managed to enter the capital once we had completely surrounded it. Still, with the city captured, they surrendered and we secured their whole nation and Greenland and Iceland too. Now all of Scandinavia is free except the Danish territory of North Schleswig and Schleswig-Holstein. But to simply march in and occupy them from the Germans would be foolish. We must extensively prepare for a battle against the Kaiser. Their navy, while much smaller than the British, is still twice as big as ours. This is why we are building air bases in Denmark to host our now more than 200 naval bombers. We will station 16 divisions on our border with them, while the rest and an additional 16 will garrison our ports. Forts in Jutland should not be necessary, since it is much easier to hold the river line in the north of Flensburg. But before we could fully prepare, the Germans demanded that we become their puppet. Never! Gå away, Kaiser! A few days later, the Germans declared war and we were officially friends by circumstances with the Entente. Our small front with them was quiet, but we had a great plan to bomb their navy stationed in Schleswig-Holstein. The first few port strikes were unsuccessful, but since they had almost no anti-air, we soon managed to destroy our first destroyer. Then we spotted a naval battle between the British and the Germans, and we decided to put our navy on strike force and try to help our friends. We destroyed 4 Austro-Hungarian destroyers, but the German fleet sadly managed to escape. Still, this meant we had shown our naval domination and the Baltic Sea is now ours. So on the sea and in the air everything went perfect, but on land we made a big slip-up. Odense was left completely open and the Germans had already captured it. Luckily, we have divisions in Köpenhamn, so the city is at least safe. And with a big part of the German forces having left Nordschlesien, we will stage an offensive in the hope of cutting Odense off from Germany. It took a long time to break through since they had entrenched themselves, but soon we did it and could continue down south. While they tried to pin us down, we still managed to get close to capturing Hamburg, but we never succeeded in cutting off Odense. And as we were outside of Hamburg, the Germans ramped up their submarine warfare, crippling our supply, and our navy couldn't do anything since it was repairing. So we were forced to retreat back across the sea, taking heavy casualties on the way back. After a month of the Germans trying to continue north, they stopped their offensive and the raids in the Danish belts since our navy had partially been repaired. We will now try to capture the other half of northern Schleswig, with new shipments of supply just having arrived and 36 more artillery pieces per division. We blew the Germans out of their trenches and managed to capture the tile. The Germans in Odense managed to leave before we completely encircled them, but those trying to enter Köpenhamn didn't have as much luck and we could capture 20,000 of their men. More importantly, the land bridge to Jutland has been restored and our supply is safe again. After almost half a year of no movement, we decided to try and enter Schleswig-Holstein. The Germans had problems getting supply over the river, so we could push them back over it, and since crossing the river was difficult for them, they had low organization after having crossed it. So we continued and managed to cross the river too. From there we continued like last time to Hamburg, but this time there was no divisions in the city and we entered it. This is the first big city to fall in all of Germany. The Germans tried to stage a counter-offensive to encircle the city, but this only allowed us to continue, and after a short battle in the south of Kiel, we managed to encircle the city and quickly enter it. At the same time in France, the Central Powers had surrendered and already signed an armistice. A few days later, the Germans sent a delegation to us and asked for peace too. Having achieved our objective of capturing Schleswig-Holstein, we agreed and prepared a delegation to join the ongoing Paris Peace Conference. Our demands was that North Schleswig and Schleswig-Holstein would be recognized by the Germans as our territory and that a neutral government would be set in place in Germany. And our objectives were met. The Weimar Republic was established in Germany and both territories were given to us. The French and British, and especially the Americans for some reason, tried to get us joining their new organization, the League of Nations. But since they want to demobilize our army, we refused to join. After the dissolution of the Entente and the Tsar also refusing to join the League of Nations, the situation in Germany quickly deteriorated as the British, French and Russians established their own puppet states in Germany, breaking the Versailles Treaty. The Russians even re-established the Kingdom of Prussia with Wilhelm II in charge. The treaty has been broken, we will immediately denounce it and free ourselves from its binding clauses. And with it in the trash, we must strike against those who destroyed it in the first place. The Tsar, he is slowly losing his grip over the country. The popularity of revolutionary forces has grown substantially and both stability and war support has deteriorated. We will strike now, liberating our Finnish brothers and helping the Russian workers and farmers to rise up against the Tsar's oppressive rule. While we have prepared, the Russians are nowhere to be seen. 2 divisions in northern Finland and that's it. The time to strike is here. The revolution will seize the biggest country on earth. We started our offensive in Prussia. The Russians had heavily demobilized the Prussian army and only a few Freikorps divisions had the time to get mobilized. But they were so insignificant since we could encircle and crush them immediately. After only a few days we had already arrived in Berlin and Stettin. Our goal of reaching the Oder River has been achieved and we can now stop and wait for the Russians. Forcing them to fight on foreign territory will be a massive morale loss for the regular soldiers. In the meantime, the rest of Western Prussia was captured and we even destroyed the Prussian-leaning Kingdom of Saxony to stop them from flanking our river defenses. Turning north to Finland, Russian troops had arrived, but the Tsar had sent them to their deaths. Without proper supply, the majority of their troops froze to death. So we began picking on the easy prey, encircling 2 of their divisions and simply waiting 2 days until they surrendered. Since our first attack was so successful, we decided to try and seize the only 2 ports supplying Murmansk and northern Finland. The Russians fought bravely and an influenza pandemic made worse by the cold weather almost halted us in our tracks, but the Russians were also hit by the pandemic and as we broke through there were no divisions stopping us from entering Romanov on Murman. Back to Prussia, a small force of Russians have arrived, but after 2 years of war with the Germans they lack guns and artillery. And with no morale it didn't take long until we had broken through and captured Breslau. The Prussian puppet still didn't surrender, so we continued to Oberschließen and captured Opeln. For the second time, Wilhelm II surrendered and all Russian forces in the area were now encircled. The Russian garrisons in Poland tried to help them, but we had already crushed them once they arrived. We will now halt their offensive in Prussia. The most elite Russian troops have reinforced the area and we can't risk to widen our front too much. And in northern Finland we can't risk running out of supply like the Russians if we advance too much south. So our only option is to open a new front.
Människan hon är människa, därför måste man ge henne bröd. Ty hon blir inte mätt av prat, det lindrar ej hennes nöd. Slut upp kamrat, slut upp med oss kamrat, din plats är här. Slut upp i vår arbetarenhetsfront, du som också är proletär.
We have arrived outside of Petrograd. We tried to encircle the city by crossing the river, but Russian reinforcements started arriving, so we began assaulting the city instead and stopped any divisions from entering it. After only 2 weeks of fighting, the Russian capital was ours. Due to our massive success in Finland, the Russian army had completely left Prussia. Only a single division was present. So we could recapture Opeln and the neighboring cities and for the first time enter Danzig and Königsberg. In the meantime, we deployed 24 cavalry divisions which will exploit gaps in the Russian front. As they arrived to the front line, we began our offensive into Poland. They had divisions in Warsaw, but we decided to continue south without capturing the city all the way to Slovakia. Krakow and a ton of Russian divisions were now encircled. Back to Warsaw, we managed to encircle the city too, and it didn't take long until the garrisons were crushed and the Polish capital was ours. We continued our offensive and captured Brest-Litovsk, Lvov and Stanislavov, encircling 9 Russian divisions. Almost 1 million Russians have now died and the Tsar still has problems at home. One last offensive to Kiev and the Soviet peasants will have enough and rise up against the Tsar. From both the south and the north our quick cavalry divisions met no Russian troops and could capture Kiev shortly after the offensive began. We had also encircled about 80,000 of their men and as we destroyed them the situation in Russia had reached a boiling point. The Russian Democratic Federative Republic rised up under our protection. They had their capital in Sevastopol and a substantial force in the Caucasus, but also in the most northern parts of Russia and Siberia. So let's once and for all destroy the Tsar. It didn't take long until we approached their last big city, Tsaritsin. That was when the news arrived that our Soviet friends had captured the Tsar and his family fleeing east on train. They had already shot them dead and the rest of their crumbling loyalists surrendered. Our war against the Russian monarchy is over. Socialism has spread to all of its former empire. We started to integrate Finland and Karelia into our own land while we set up puppet states in the rest of our conquered territories. The Third Internationale has succeeded. Now all we have to do is to build up the war-torn states that we have liberated. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.